Welcome to LGBT Olim's session, Debunking the Myths and Misconceptions about LGBT Aliyah. Okay, so we did a Zoom, I think it was last month, in which we talked about LGBT Olim, what we do, the services we provide, and so on. And um, one of the bits of feedback that we got from that session was that, there are a lot of questions that people have about making Aliyah. Um, and so I thought it would be great to have a session where that is the main focus, because there's obviously a lot of turmoil around the world at the moment. There's a huge rise in anti-Semitism, and a lot of people are considering making Aliyah. Just to introduce myself again, my name is Roy Freeman. I founded LGBT Olim back in 2013, about a year after I made Aliyah myself, because I realized that there wasn't really anything in Israel for LGBTQ plus Olim. Okay, there's a very vibrant LGBT community. Obviously, there's a very large Olim community, but there wasn't anything that kind of bridged both communities. And so that's really why I started LGBT Olim, as well as the LGBT English speakers groups and the events that we run in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, and Beersheba, and online, and as well as the LGBT focused Hebrew classes we run. One of the other things that we do is is answer questions for people that are making Aliyah, LGBTQ questions specifically. Obviously, I would always recommend, if you are already talking to an Aliyah advisor, they should be your main focus in terms of asking questions. They will be able to give you completely up-to-date information. But one thing I've learned since starting LGBT Olim is that some people are not comfortable talking to their Aliyah advisor about LGBT stuff, which is, fair enough. And not everyone is comfortable opening up about these kinds of things. And so, over the years, I've been asked a number of questions, and there's a lot of the same questions come up time and time again. So I thought it'd be nice to be able to put all of that information into one place so that people can watch it. And like I said, the plan is to upload this to our YouTube channel. So let me just share my slide. One second. This is as much for my focus as anyone else's. Have I? Yes. So you should be able to see my slide saying debunking the myths around LGBTQ Aliyah. One of the questions or one of the misconceptions that I've come across time and time again is that some people think that LGBT people cannot make Aliyah, that they're going to get a blanket refusal because Israel doesn't let gays in. Okay, so I haven't heard this one quite so much recently, but the perception is still out there. And of course, it's not true. There are enough LGBTQ Olim and Olot in Israel to prove that they're quite happy for us to be here and to welcome us just like any other Oleh. So if you're concerned that you're going to be rejected just because you're gay or lesbian or bi or trans, then that is not going to happen. Okay, so let's get that one out of the way first of all. Um, if you are planning on making Aliyah, depending upon where you're living, okay, there's one of two organizations that you should contact. If you're in North America, then you should make contact with Nefesh B'Nefesh because they deal with Olim from that part of the world. If you are pretty much anywhere else, then you will talk directly to the Jewish Agency. Okay. And so they're really your first port of call. If you're seriously considering making Aliyah, and you would like to check your eligibility, then they are the people to contact. Okay, they will be able to give you answers. They will open a file for you. And to be honest, Nefesh B'Nefesh is there as a I guess a front, for want of a better word, a facade for the Jewish Agency. They provide a number of additional services, but ultimately they are there to collect the same information from you as if you were talking to the Jewish Agency yourself. Okay, so you are going to need to prove that you are Jewish. Okay, because if you're making Aliyah, then you need to abide by what Israel calls the law of return. And that basically defines that anyone who has at least one Jewish grandparent, and when we talk about Jewish, we mean halachically Jewish, one halachically Jewish grandparent, and you can prove that, then you are eligible for Aliyah. Okay, there are some caveats, but that is generally the rule. All right. So they will want you to prove that in one of a number of different ways. It may be that they want to see your parents' Jewish wedding certificate if they were married in in a synagogue. They may want a letter from a rabbi who knows you well from a community that you belong to. There are a number of ways that you can prove your Jewishness. How you go about that will depend on a case per case basis. Okay. They will also want you to prove your identity. Okay, so they'll want things like birth certificate, passports, etc. And that kind of leads us on to gender markers. So we'll talk about that in a second. And they will want information about your education. They will want information about your marriage status. They will want information about any criminal records. They will want a police check um, so that they can see if you have any criminal background. Okay. Again, having a criminal background does not, or history does not exclude you from making Aliyah. Okay. It depends upon the crime. So don't think that that will exclude you as well. So one of the questions that I often am asked is, do I have to hide that I'm gay or lesbian, when I'm making Aliyah? The answer is no, you don't have to hide it. Do you have to be open about it? No, you don't. That is completely up to you. Okay. If you're a single person, you haven't been married or are not married, then you don't have to tell them that you're LGBT or LGB in this case. Because, if you want to share that information with them, you can. They may be able to or should be able to give you better advice if they know you. But if you don't tell them, that's fine as well. Again, the advice that you get might be slightly off. For example, a guy I know didn't disclose that he was gay, and they recommended that he live in a small town far from Tel Aviv, and where there wasn't an LGBT community because they didn't know that's what he was looking for, and he wasn't very happy there and eventually moved to Tel Aviv anyway. Okay, so it's totally up to you whether you want to be open about your sexuality or not. Okay, if you're married in a same-sex relationship, then obviously that's not something you can hide. Um, yeah, so again, you should and you will be treated, if you're a married couple, you'll be treated like any same-sex or any straight married couple. Okay, so expect the same level of respect that a straight couple would expect, okay? Because that's what we deserve, and that is how the Jewish Agency will treat you, okay? If you don't, let us know, okay? And we can escalate that. But on the whole, from what I've heard no stories of people being discriminated against or even negative remarks made about LGBT people or same-sex couples. So you will need to provide wedding certificates and so on. So the choice of disclosing your sexuality is completely up to you. When it comes to trans people, things get a little bit more complicated. And again, it depends where you are from. And when I say it can get complicated, it's because of the identity paperwork that you have from your home country. Okay. As far as I'm aware, Israel will give you the same gender that you have on your paperwork from back home. So if you have changed your birth certificate, so if you live in if you live in a state or a country where you can change your birth certificate, gender marker, then that is what you'll get on your Israeli ID and on your Israeli passport. Your passport, your birth certificate, and so on, whatever you show the Jewish agency or Nefesh B'Nefesh, that will generally be the gender that you will be assigned. Okay. If you don't have that paperwork changed, if it's not showing the correct gender, then you can make Aliyah as whatever you were assigned at birth, and then you can change your markers afterwards once you've made Aliyah. Some countries don't allow you to change your birth certificate. Some countries do, some states do, some states don't. If your passport has been updated, then generally they can give you your Israeli ID based upon the gender that you want. Okay. Like I said, changing your gender markers in Israel after making Aliyah isn't so difficult. You don't have to have had any operations. You don't have to you'll basically be interviewed And at the end of that interview, they will generally change the paperwork for you. Okay, so it's not a major trauma, hopefully. And so that's not a problem as well. We have a question coming in. What happens when the sex on your birth certificate and passport don't exist in Israel? So there is no third gender option in Israel. The only options that you have at the moment uh, for um, for your passport and your ID is M or F. There's no X option. So that's a good question. You will need to discuss that with your Aliyah advisor, and hopefully they'll be able to help you choose, okay, which where you want to go with that. Okay, but there is no X option on Israeli passports. All right, so just bear that in mind. Yeah, if you decide to make Aliyah. We have a question here. Oh, okay. So if you do have problems with your Aliyah advisor, then you can ask for a different one. Okay, you can escalate it as well. And again, we have hooks into the Jewish Agency and Nefesh B'Nefesh where we can report that kind of stuff. So if you are from or living in a place where your advisor is not LGBTQ friendly, we should be able to get you someone who is. Okay, you shouldn't have to tolerate any of that stuff. Exactly. So yeah, the message we got here said you reported to switch advisors and didn't have any further problems. Exactly. Okay, you deserve to be treated with respect. And if you're not treated with that respect by the first advisor, you can get it changed and speak to somebody else. Okay. Um, Also, we have a question. Do I need to disclose I changed my name when my new name is everywhere and even on the birth certificate? So that brings up a good question. Okay. So traditionally, I've always said to people, because this is what I believe to be true, that if you have transitioned, you would need to provide your birth certificate. You would need to provide paperwork that proves your transition. And of course, if you've got a new passport with the correct gender on it, you would need to provide that. And they would want to see that whole history, if you like. Okay. However, I'm also aware of people who are trans that have made Aliyah by stealth, for want of a better phrase. So if all of your paperwork matches, okay, so you've had your birth certificate updated, you've had your passport corrected, and so on, and your name changed, then as long as they will want to see that paperwork, and if it's all matches, then great. You can basically provide the same paperwork as a cisgender person, and you needn't come out as trans. Okay. There is a little bit of risk involved with that because if somewhere along the way they say, oh, something, we noticed that this doesn't match, they might want to go back and collect all that paperwork. But I haven't heard of any situations where that has happened. Okay. So if you're L, G, or B, and you're not comfortable coming out during your process, you don't need to, unless, of course, you're in a same-sex marriage, etc. And if you're trans, you can come out as trans and provide all that paperwork, but there is potentially an option of not doing that. Okay, so that again is your choice. But if everything matches, then um, then why go through all of that hassle of collecting old paperwork and so on? Okay, the choice is yours. Um, Another question that I receive a lot is about people in same-sex relationships. Okay. Um, yep. So yes, they will. If they are aware that you transitioned, they will want that name change information. And again, that's the same with cisgender people as well. If you have changed names, then they will want to see that paperwork. They want you to prove that this is your identity. Okay, so that is the same, regardless of whether you're cis or trans, really. Okay. So like I said, we've got a lot of questions, had a lot of questions in the past about same-sex marriage, and same-sex couples. Okay. If you are both Jewish and you are married, or if one of you is Jewish and you're married to a non-Jewish person, then you can both make Aliyah together. Okay. So the law of return states that anyone who has a Jewish grandparent and their spouse and their children can make Aliyah. Okay. So if you're in a marriage, and it has to be marriage, it can't be what's the word? Losing the word. Someone help me here. So it has to be marriage. Okay.
Civil partnership.
Thank you. Civil partnership is the phrase I was looking for. Thank you. That or domestic partnership, that is not sufficient. Okay. So if you want your marriage to be recognized in Israel, it has to be a marriage that has been performed in a country where that is legal. Okay. And again, in that situation, you won't be treated any differently from a heterosexual married couple. All right. If you are domestic partners and you're both Jewish, you can potentially, just both make Aliyah. You are both Jewish, and so you can make Aliyah. But if one of you is not Jewish and you're in a domestic partnership, then it's going to get complicated. Okay. The Jewish partner will be able to make Aliyah. The other one will be able to get a flight and come to Israel with them, but then they will have to go through the process of getting visas and so on to remain in Israel. And that is a lot of hassle. Okay. There's no two ways about that. So I know I'm not in any position to tell anyone what to do, but if you're thinking about getting married, okay, and one of you isn't Jewish, and you think about getting married and moving to Israel, get married. Okay. They will probably want you to wait a year after marriage just to prove that it's going to stick.
Mm.
And then you can apply for marriage together, for Aliyah together. Okay. Um, one question here as well. Yeah. So there is no hard and fast rule about that 1 year, but generally they will want you to have been married for a while. If they say anything more than a year, then I would escalate. And again, that takes me to a very general rule about making Aliyah. They will push back on you. Okay. They will ask for paperwork. Um, if it gets to a point when it feels like things are getting ridiculous, you have the right to say, why are you asking me for this? And to push back. Okay. But once you've been married for a year, again, if you're a mixed faith couple, then you will be able to make Aliyah together. Okay. Both you and your partner will get Israeli IDs. They will say that you are married. You will be able to get Israeli passports. Okay, so that is something that's available to straight couples, to gay and lesbian couples. It doesn't make any difference at all. Okay. Um, I have I have known couples, and I do know couples where one made Aliyah because they're Jewish, and the other one came with. And there's a number of Israelis that have met non-Jewish people wherever, and they have wanted to move to Israel to be with their Israeli partner. It is a long process. It can take years, okay, to become a citizen, to get an Israeli passport, and so on. So if you can get yourself into that situation where you can both make Aliyah together, I would strongly recommend doing that. Okay. So, like I said, I'm not here telling you get married. But if that's something that is, on the cards, then why not? Okay. And it'll make the process a lot easier. Okay. Um, so that kind of covers the next question as well. Can my same-sex non-Jewish spouse make Aliyah with you? Yes, as long as you are legally married. Okay. Also had a question a few times about children. If you're in a same-sex relationship and you have children, okay, then obviously those children can make Aliyah if they're your children. Again, it can be a little bit complicated if you are Jewish and you have a non-Jewish spouse and the children are legally theirs, but not yours, then that can get complicated because the children have to be the children of the Jewish partner. So as long as you have legally adopted, yes, absolutely. So under 18, yes. If they're over 18, they can make Aliyah on their own, um, provided they fit the criteria. So you need to ensure that, if you are making Aliyah with a non-Jewish spouse and their children, it makes sense. Again, I can't tell you what to do and what's appropriate for your situation, but if you can adopt and then they are legally yours, then they can make Aliyah with you because they are your children and not just your partner's children. Okay, so it can get complicated in those situations, but there are solutions for all of these things. Okay. So, one thing I would like people to get out of this or get from this session, obviously, it's not up to me to tell you whether you are eligible or not. I don't have the power, and we're not going to sit here and go through all the paperwork. What I want to encourage you to do is if you are thinking about making Aliyah, then don't be afraid or don't be concerned about contacting the Jewish agency or Nefesh B'Nefesh. Don't expect discrimination. Okay, if you go in there expecting discrimination, you're going to be, starting this on the back foot. Okay, so go in there knowing that you have the right to make Aliyah, most likely. Okay, they will tell you what paperwork they need, and they will treat you with the respect that you deserve. Okay. Um, so that's a good question. Okay. There's a question in the chat here. Where are you most and least likely to encounter discrimination after Aliyah? That is a good question. So one thing I can tell you from my own experience, um, coming from, ostensibly a Christian country, I'm originally from the UK, where homophobia is still, to a certain extent, institutionalized, and you worry about who you might talk to, who you might come out to, or who you need to come out to, and how you're going to be treated. I found that coming to Israel, that didn't exist. So, for example, going to the Interior Ministry with my now husband, he was my partner at the time, and getting things sorted, there was no discrimination there. Okay. When he and I got married in the UK and brought our paperwork to Israel, and took it to the Interior Ministry to get our ID cards updated, we were served by a religious guy wearing a kippah, and there was no discrimination. He didn't even pull a face. There was nothing. He just treated us, again, with the respect that we deserved. The paperwork was done and our IDs were updated. Okay. So when dealing with government agencies like that, you should not receive any discrimination. The main situations I've heard are when dealing with housing. Okay. Um, Even as a straight cisgender person, finding an apartment to rent is difficult. Okay. The situation here with landlords and contracts is messy. Okay. And there are homophobic and transphobic landlords. There's no point pretending that isn't the case. My advice would be if someone's going to be like that, then it's nice that they showed it up front and you don't have to pay them a penny. You can walk away and, put two fingers or as many fingers up to them as you like. Okay. So one thing I like is that when people show their phobias, their hatred up front, you know exactly what you're dealing with. So that's one thing you can deal with. There is a so the Aguda is Israel's LGBT national LGBT lobby group. They have a website where you can report homophobic incidents. So things like situations with landlords, situations with employers, and so on. Hate crimes, if and when they exist and when they happen, you can report those, and they collect the statistics, and they use that information, in their annual reports and so on. So in terms of education, again, in most situations, you're going to be fine. You'll hopefully find that Israelis are, on the whole, tolerant of LGBT people. Okay. Again, if you find that an employer is not accepting, then you can report that to the Aguda. There is also an organization called LGBT Work. It used to be called LGBT Tech. And they actually have a registry of companies that have signed up with them that promise to provide, an equitable working environment, a safe environment for LGBT people. So again, you can pick and choose where you want to work, but if there are situations where you're discriminated against, you do have legal protection. Okay, and there are organizations that will help you here, especially if you need legal help. Okay, so I'm not going to pretend everything's perfect here. I'm not going to pretend it's, that everyone loves LGBT people, but there are things that we can do if and when those situations arise. As an Orthodox Jew, the choice is yours. I mean, there are LGBT-friendly Orthodox synagogues, and I know Often that sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but it does exist in Israel. Okay, there are LGBT-friendly Orthodox synagogues in Tel Aviv. I'm sure there are in Jerusalem as well. Okay, there are a lot of progressive synagogues as well that are obviously LGBT-friendly as well. We do have a list of LGBT-friendly synagogues on the LGBT Olim website, so you can look those up. Again, you have the choice of disclosing um, who you are to whoever you want. Okay. Making Aliyah, you have the choice of deciding which community you want to live in and be part of. Okay. So I would always advise try and make it as easy as you can. You know, get in with a crowd that is will be open to your gender identity, your sexuality. And if they're not like that, well, go somewhere else. We can't always change people's minds, but we can decide who we want to interact with. Okay. The last question on this slide is where do I start? Like I said, the first thing you should do if you are planning on making Aliyah is talk to Nefesh B'Nefesh or the Jewish Agency. Okay, they will open a file for you. They will tell you what paperwork. They will run through some initial questions, of course. Hold on, there's a question I missed. They will run through some initial questions, and then they'll want you to collect the paperwork and send it into them. Okay. Ultimately, the people that make the decision as to whether or not you can make Aliyah is the Interior Ministry, Misrad Habanim. Okay, so once all the paperwork has been collected by Nefesh B'Nefesh, by the Jewish Agency, it gets passed on to the Interior Ministry, and that is where your application gets processed. Okay, in some cases, it can happen really quickly if everything's nice and simple. Then, if you've got your parents' ketubah, your marriage certificate, if you've got a letter from a rabbi, if you've got all your paperwork, you've got no criminal record, blah, 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 they should get back to you very quickly. Okay. In some cases, it can um, it can take longer. Okay. That's a good question. How long does the file stay open? That is a good question. That's one thing I can't answer. I'm not aware that they close files after any amount of any period of activity. Okay. If you decide you want to and then things go on hold, you come back, you can reopen the same file, as far as I'm aware. Okay. Bearing in mind, a lot of the paperwork they're asking for will expire. Okay. Your police check will have an expiration on it. If it's more than whatever it is, 6 months old, they will ask you for a new one. Okay. If there's been any changes to your birth certificate, they'll most likely want an update on that. That's less likely. So be aware that things do expire. Some paperwork does expire. And if you leave it for a while, it will only, yeah, exactly as Aria. The police check and the personal status, exactly. Okay. Apostilles, I don't think expire, do they? It's the actual underlying paperwork that they deem is too old. All right. Absolutely. All right. So there's a question here as well. What if you plan to spend some time in your home country? Can you split your time, or do you have to spend 183 days in Israel, etc.? So that is a good question. Okay. The assumption is that you're making Aliyah to live in Israel. Okay. If you want to spend some time out of the country, that's a possibility. But bear in mind, obviously they are tracking every movement in and out of the country. You are expected to use your Israeli passport. You are required to use your Israeli passport whenever you leave and enter the country. You can't, if you have an Israeli passport, you cannot use another passport to enter and leave. They will want to see that Israeli passport. There have been some exceptions to that during the pandemic and so on. The only thing that I would say is that when you do apply for a passport, they will look back over the last period of the passport to see how much time you spent in the country. Okay. And if you don't meet the requirements, they will not give you a new passport. They will give you what we call a Teudat Ma'avar, a travel document. Okay, it's not a legal passport. It is recognized by some countries, but it requires a visa. But that is what you would use for coming in and entering and leaving Israel. And you would use your other nationality's passport for going anywhere else because there'll be less visa requirements in that respect. Okay, so just bear in mind if you are planning on spending considerable amounts of time outside Israel, it will affect the chances of you getting a renewed passport when it comes down to renewing it. Yes, they do sometimes change the requirements. Um, yeah. So, yes, they can be awkward sometimes. And sometimes it feels as though they're deliberately being awkward. Um, But I guess the reason that they are as pedantic as they are is because they want to avoid situations where people come to Israel and make Aliyah who shouldn't be allowed to. There have been instances of that in the past, and so that is why the rules and regulations are there these days, and why they're so careful. Okay.
I have a few questions, but I can't use chat because I'm on Apple TV and my phone is
Okay.
up.
No
My daughter,
worries.
my daughter made Aliyah 4 years ago. Served in the army. She's graduating right minute university. I'm in Texas, and I don't necessarily want to leave the United States. I mean, I'm well settled and I have a great community. But how fast can I make Aliyah if the situation here changes? I mean, I mean, can I literally get on a plane and apply for Aliyah, or should I
No,
start paying
it's not
in
that quick.
advance?
So I would suggest starting that in advance. And one thing I would like, actually, Neil, would you like to answer this one? Because I know that you mentioned something to me recently about people being able to start the process and putting it on hold and then reopening it at some point. So Neil, yeah, unmuted. Excellent.
Done. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can, yeah.
Okay, great.
So
Okay.
just introduce yourself first of all, Neil. Sorry.
Oh, hi. I'm Neil Greengrass. I'm an Israeli American attorney. I'm currently in California, and I handle a lot of Aliyah cases, especially LGBT Aliyah cases. So I think I came to the right place. I'm happy to answer your question. What was the name of the person who just asked that question?
It was Masha.
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 Hi, Masha. Hi.
Hi.
So the Nefesh B'Nefesh is currently taking from 4 to 6 months to process an application, and that's if everything is smooth. But you need to take into account that you're going to have to get your documents in order. That means a birth certificate with apostille and an FBI background check with an apostille, and all of those things take time. So I find that often collecting the documents that you need takes as much time as Nefesh B'Nefesh takes to actually process your application. Does that make sense, Masha?
It does. I'm not saying that I want to go to Israel for sure. I need a bailout country. And
You need a
with
plan
my
B.
daughter living in Israel, then obviously, I mean, I'll be there in June for her graduation. I go back and forth quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
Um, Although my ketubah has my dead name, but but yeah, I mean,
Okay.
so
So maybe this is a good Roy, can I add a few things, or would you like to
Absolutely,
do?
go for it.
Okay, so here in the U.S., I don't know how many of you are from the U.S. I assume most of you. We have a very particular situation that pertains to trans people, not to LGBT, but specifically to trans people, and that stems from the attack of the administration on trans people. There was an order by the Trump administration in the first month after taking power to discontinue issuing passports to under changed names to trans people, and to discontinue all changed gender markers. So what they started to do, if anybody doesn't know, the Trump administration, when they received a renewal application, a passport renewal application for trans people, they either just didn't act on it, sat on it, or they, on their own, reverted to the person's sex at birth. In other words, they canceled your reassignment on your passport. And the result of that is that people started to have the people who are stuck with this decision had birth certificates and passports that didn't match. And that is a big, big problem for immigration to any country, including Israel, and could prevent your aliyah. So what happened with that is that the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, filed a lawsuit managed to have an injunction issued where the administration has to continue issuing passports as usual to trans people. And if this is complicated, please ask me. So as it is right now, the State Department is issuing passports to trans people under their changed names or changed gender marker. But the decision is under appeal right now. The Trump administration is appealing it, and we have no idea whether the next court will grant or deny the administration's appeal. So it is possible that if you're trans and you're trying to travel in the next few years, you will just not be able to, and take that into account. So I'm advising every trans person who comes to me and asks, should I make Aliyah? Should I say, you know what, I can't, I quote Roy, I say, you know, I can't tell you whether or not to make Aliyah, but I need to tell you that if you don't take some action now, you may not be able to later. You may really be stuck. As long as
I
Neil.
can give you some
Sorry.
more information on that. I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I follow orders as Trump. Yeah, we have an injunction, and they've just asked, our side has asked for a summary judgment, but it's been appealed to the Supreme Court.
Right.
Right now, there is a window. I was issued a male passport, and I basically, when the injunction was ordered, I immediately reapplied, and I have back my female passport. So it's going to the Supreme Court, and you know, who knows what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
But right now, you can get your correct sex marker on your passport. You can't get an X, but that's not Israel doesn't support an X.
Right.
So.
Right, but the Supreme Court is now 6-3, so 6-3 conservative. So I think we need to assume that the worst could happen, and that's the safe.
Yeah, sure.
So and not everybody wants to emigrate, but because making Aliyah is a fairly simple process. That's what I'm recommending. I'm recommending to some clients who are really nervous about it and have the flexibility to go live in Israel for a year, because that's how long it takes after arrival, say a year, to get a 5-year passport, to actually go make Aliyah at least temporarily, and then have the freedom to come and go. Although we don't know what's going to happen in the U.S., and we don't know to what extent trans people will be able to come back to the U.S. after several years. We just don't know. Roy, can I add a couple of items that
Please
came
do.
up?
Sure.
Okay, about Israeli immigration in general. So the Ministry of Interior actually is right now, even though it's in religious hands, is actually very open and very liberal when it comes to LGBT, and really does not discriminate. It discriminates in the sense that there are special processes. So let's say if you're married, right, to a same-sex spouse, there are different forms that you need to fill out, and those forms contain specific questions that are relevant to same-sex spouses. But there's no discrimination in the sense of denial of cases. Certainly not. They test the bona fides of the marriage just like they do in any other case. Just take into account that whereas in the U.S. Or in Canada, if you are Jewish and you're marrying you can be Jewish and marry a non-Jew. Roy mentioned that you could make Aliyah and then bring your spouse into Israel. Take into account that you will not be able to get married in Israel because only people of the same religion can marry in Israel. Right? So Christians can marry Christians, Muslims can marry Muslims, and Jews can marry only Jews. So what you need to do is leave Israel and get married.
Temporarily.
Sorry, Roy?
Temporarily.
Temporarily, yeah.
Israel, get married, and come back.
And then come back. If you're the Jew, you're going to be able to get back in. Your spouse may not be able to get back in that situation. So that's why listen to Roy carefully and get married as far in advance as possible. if you're
And
so
also remember that because there's only religious marriage, even if you are the same religion, they're not going to marry you. None of the religious authorities in Israel perform same-sex marriage between people of the same religion. So yeah,
inclined.
whether or not you're going to have to leave, go to the US, go to the UK, wherever in Europe. There are which state is it in the US? Is it no, can't remember which state it is. Well, there is a state that does online marriages. Utah, sorry, I always think it's Idaho for some reason.
It's always
So
Utah.
that is valid, and at the moment, that is recognized as a legal marriage here. So if you want to do one of those, you don't need to leave the country for that. But yes, bear in mind there is not civil marriage in Israel. Okay, when and if there is civil marriage, there will be same-sex marriage. Okay.
Amen. Amen.
And I always say to anyone that disagrees with me, I will be the first on the doorstep to complain and to sue if they try and bring in civil marriage without. I'm sure I'm not the only one. There'll be plenty of people. So yes,
But
excellent. Thanks. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Neil?
sorry, Roy. I had
Was
a
it?
couple
Yeah.
of other things to add, but I don't need
Hmm.
to. One question came up about apostilles. No,
Yeah.
apostilles don't ever expire. But as a practical
Okay.
matter, if you have a document that's very old, very often the apostille office will require you to go and get an updated one. So that would be typically that's not a birth certificate because birth certificates don't expire, right? But marriage certificates are treated with more suspicion, and so you might actually need to get an updated one, divorce decrees, and so on. So typically, if the document was issued in the last 5 years, the apostille office will just stamp it and authenticate it. If it's older, you may be asked to get a new version, which is again problematic in many states in the U.S. for trans people. States like
Which
Texas.
marriage counts? The civil marriage or the rabbi marriage with a ketubah? Which one
Ah,
counts?
you're talking about your own marriage?
Yeah, well, I mean,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean, I was married civilly. I was married by a rabbi to my Jewish wife, so I also have a ketubah. And just as an interesting point, it may apply to other states, but I plan on getting remarried again civilly, because in Texas, you can marry same sex. Obviously, I transitioned without divorcing my wife. I can actually get a marriage certificate and get remarried.
Mhm. So for purposes of Aliyah, to bring your current spouse, you're going to need to prove that you divorced your prior spouse, and you're going to need to get that apostilled, right? So the Jewish agency, the Nefesh B'Nefesh, is going to require proof that your prior marriage was terminated, and it needs to be a civil marriage,
Yeah.
right? So, or if it's a rabbinical marriage, that it was recognized as a civil marriage. Okay, last point I
Exactly. That
want.
changes. That's different in different countries as well.
Yes.
Like in the UK, your religious marriage is and the civil marriage are the same day. In France, for example, they're separate entities, I believe.
Absolutely. Okay,
Yeah,
last point, Roy, and then I'll be
sure.
quiet.
Okay.
Expiration of the Aliyah application, it's very important. They technically do expire after 6 months. So basically, what expires is your permit to come to Israel. So once your application is approved, you'll have 6 months to make Aliyah. After 6 months, your application it won't be terminated, but you'll need to, as Roy was saying, supplement your documentation because many of the documents will expire. Your medical examination, if you need one, your health declaration, your background check, your police check. What doesn't ever expire is your proof of Jewishness. So if you've already proved that you're Jewish, that's going to be on their books, and and then it'll be much easier to restart your Aliyah application.
And don't let them tell you otherwise.
They'll tell you otherwise, Roy? Is that what you
No,
said?
yeah, no, because some people, they go back and they say, we need another letter from a rabbi. And it's like, well, as you said, once you've proved it once, that should be sufficient for them.
The only exception is, and I had a case like this, is there's a rule that's not in the instructions in Nefesh B'Nefesh, that in addition to getting a rabbinical letter, you actually have to be Jewish, and you have to have not converted. You have to not be practicing another religion. So if they suspect that you're let's say a Jew for Jesus, they may well ask for a letter from a rabbi saying that you're a current member of that congregation, of a non-messianic congregation, right? To prove that you're still Jewish. But that's very, very rare. So there is another procedure that I entered into with the Jewish Agency less than a year ago to allow people to register as Jewish, to have an open file that they can then utilize whenever they want to make Aliyah. And that will cut several months off the process when you're actually ready to make Aliyah.
But you just need to provide the paperwork that needs to be recent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that if you're concerned that things in your country are going from bad to worse, or that you might need to make Aliyah more quickly than the normal procedure, you might want to do that or apply for Aliyah, as Roy was saying. Take into account that the current waiting times are quite short compared to what they could be. They could be 2 years, right? So, I mean, the more people that make demands on the system, the more the system is going to slow down. And specifically in the US, we're already seeing a slowdown in issuance of certain identity vital documentation from the government. We're seeing the FBI, unless you pay a lot of money for an expedite, the FBI check can take you several months, and then the authentication can take you several months. So all of this can add a lot of time to the process. And as things in the US continue to devolve, as institutions continue to be attacked and defunded and disintegrate, you should expect waiting times to continue to mount. Okay.
So there was a question, sorry, Neil. There was a question, is there a process, is there a procedure? What if you want to start the process, like you said, prove your Jewishness and then put things on hold? Is there something you need to do, or do you just tell them, please hold this and I'll, apply or continue later on?
It's a little tricky. Is this to me, Roy?
Yes, question? To you.
If it's a little bit tricky, you need to be wily about it. If you tell Nefesh B'Nefesh that you don't really intend to make Aliyah now, they just won't handle your case.
Yeah.
So they don't have a placeholder system. The system that I told you about is one that I worked out privately with the Aliyah office, directly with the Jewish Agency. So Nefesh B'Nefesh is an NGO that's contracted specifically for people actually intending to make Aliyah 6 months after approved. If you want to do it that way, apply. Don't tell them that you may or may not want to go. And your statement of you're going to have to write a declaration of intent. And in your declaration, you're just going to say that you want to make Aliyah, you're Jewish, you want to be in the Jewish homeland, whatever you want to say. You're going to be interviewed, and at any time, if they think, if it's clear to them that you don't intend to make Aliyah, they will stop processing your application. Whereas if you go this second route, okay, sorry, I'll answer your question. After it's approved and you're in your 6 months period, you can certainly tell them, things have changed, I'm not going right now. I'd like to go later, and you're still in their records as Jewish, and your process will still be faster the next time. The alternative is to directly go in the second way that I told you about, which is the placeholder way, and that application would not be with Nefesh B'Nefesh. You would need to do that with a lawyer who's authorized to handle that. And honestly, I don't know anybody besides myself who's doing that, but I assume that other lawyers will be able to do that with you.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Neil.
Sure.
There's a couple of other questions that have come through. If you're secular, how do you get a rabbi's letter? That is a good question. If you have family that know the community well, that could be a way of getting a letter from a rabbi. You could temporarily join a synagogue and go a few times to get a letter. But to be honest, I don't think it's mandatory. If your parents have an Orthodox ketubah, an Orthodox marriage certificate, then that should be sufficient to prove your Jewishness. Okay. They will probably want the original. But at a push, they might accept a copy of it. But that should be enough. So if the parents are not supportive, yeah. So the best bet is to start going to a shul. Yeah, and get friendly with someone, a rabbi. Yeah.
I've seen cases recently where because in the United States there's so much intermarriage. And here on the West Coast we have 80% intermarriage,
Wow.
and many people have never stepped foot in a synagogue, and their parents haven't. This is starting to become problematic, and the Jewish Agency is asking for secondary proof. So what you said is absolutely the way to go. Join a synagogue, go once a month, make sure you go meet the rabbi even once, make yourself known, pay the minimum dues, and get that in place so that you can get a letter. And that's going to obviate a lot of problems.
Sounds so cynical, but yeah, that is the way to go. So yeah, I mean, again, the letter from the rabbi should not expire. Okay. So go for it. Get a letter from the rabbi now. So absolutely, if you're friendly with the rabbi already, then get it done, get it apostilled, submit that when you're ready. Okay. So in terms of healthcare, um, and in terms of LGBT healthcare, there are a few things I just wanted to cover here. First of all, there's very good health systems. I'm sure you've heard in Israel, a public healthcare system. It's basically made up of four, what we call the Kupat Halim. Okay, there are two larger ones that I recommend LGBT people joining. That is Maccabi and Clalit. There are two smaller ones which I wouldn't recommend going for just because they're smaller and they don't have such a presence across the entire country. Okay, so Clalit or Maccabi are the ones to choose, and this is something that they will expect you to choose the moment you land in the country. Okay, so when you make Aliyah and they give you your temporary paperwork and so on, they will want you to set that up. Okay, so you made the decision. The reason that well, there's a number of reasons why I suggest Clalit and Maccabi. First of all, they are very LGBT friendly in that they have LGBT clinics in Tel Aviv and Haifa. I think one of them also has an LGBT clinic in Jerusalem. Okay, so if you want to go somewhere where you're not going to receive any discrimination or any dirty looks or any negative comments, then those clinics are definitely the way to go. Okay. You can also change your family doctor at any time. Okay, so if you don't particularly like your doctor, you can change it and register with a new one. Okay, so if you're not particularly keen on your doctor's bedside manner, then yeah, you can feel you are able to change that at any time. You are also able to move from one Kupa Cholim to another. Okay, I think there are limits on how frequently you can do that. But if you're really unhappy with the service you're getting for example, from Clalit, then you can move to Maccabi or vice versa. Okay, so those are definitely. Sorry, yes, thanks for putting that in the chat. Clalit and Maccabi. Okay. Um, One question that I've been asked a number of times over the years is from people that are living with HIV. Again, there is no discrimination here. If you are HIV positive, you can make Aliyah. Okay, they're not going to kick you out. They're not going to turn you around. I would strongly recommend, and this is just for anybody, if you are on regular medication, make sure when you make Aliyah that you come with a couple of months worth of medication, because it can take a little bit of time to get through the bureaucracy, to see the specialist that you need to see, to get the prescriptions that you're used to getting here in Israel. Okay, so it's a good idea to bring a couple of months of medication, whatever your situation is, and that way you can talk to your family doctor, you can get the relevant referrals as you need, And so again, a couple of months should be enough to do that.
Roy,
Yes.
can I just asked in the chat a while back, but it's related to what
Oh,
you're
sorry.
talking. It's just
Yeah.
related to what you're talking about because someone mentioned a medical test. I mean, I'm a paraplegic, so I'm just wondering, why do they want these medical things? Do they discriminate on health grounds? I mean, you mentioned HIV, but obviously people have other disabilities. I'm wondering whether it's like Australia, where, for example, they just don't let in disabled people, right?
Oh, wow, really?
It's got one of the worst migration records for disabled people, but
Wow.
obviously they want you. You mentioned, it might have been Neil that mentioned it. Health checks, and whatever. Is
I'm
that
not aware
mandatory?
of. I'm not aware of any discrimination based on health.
Right.
Okay, if
Okay.
you're Jewish, you can make Aliyah.
Uh,
I'm not aware of anyone that's been turned away. And Neil, are you aware of any situations like that?
this just came up
You
this week.
okay?
Absolutely, absolutely right. There's no discrimination based on health. The reason that Nefesh B'Nefesh asked for that is that they actually want to know in order to prepare you better for hooking up with the right medical care in Israel. So what you'll have to do when you make the application is you'll submit a declaration of health, which is kind of standard Nefesh B'Nefesh declaration. And then after that, if most people under 60 are not required to undergo any medical exam at all. But if you indicate that you have certain health conditions or chronic conditions, then you'll be asked to have a doctor fill out a medical exam, which is on a standard form of the Jewish agency. But in either case, they're not allowed to discriminate based on health, and they don't. I've never heard of a case of discrimination.
That's a relief. Thank you.
Okay. One of the other questions I often get is, is my medication available in Israel? I mean, that's a difficult one to answer because obviously it's on a per case basis. One thing I would strongly recommend, there's a Facebook group I've put here on the slide, Briim, Briut, Sheyesh. Okay, so that's Hebrew for the best health that there is. I think that's a good translation for it. It's a Facebook group that is adminned by a number of doctors. I think they're Clalit doctors, but they will quite happily answer questions from the other Kupat Cholim as well. You can post anonymously on Facebook these days, of course, and so you can ask questions there. So it's worth joining that and finding out that. I think that's probably the easiest way to find out. I mean, you can also Google it. I would avoid using things like ChatGPT because they don't always tell you. Well, they tell you what they think is the truth, but the input that they are reading from may not be accurate as well. Azari, that's a good point as well. The actual database is in Hebrew, but yeah, if with Google Translate, you should be able to work out whether what you're taking is available in Israel. Okay. Yes, if you're on HRT, you will be able to continue that. Again, it's just a case of talking to your family doctor and getting the referrals. Okay. So as far as I'm aware, there are no problems with that. Okay. Also, if you're planning to come to Israel and then transitioning, again, there are organizations here. It has to be said there are waiting lists if you're looking for surgery. There are long waiting lists for some types of surgery. So I do know some trans people that have opted for going overseas for that stuff. Okay, just because they didn't want to wait so long. All right. I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to bring up in terms of healthcare. All right, so like I said, Clalit or Maccabi, those are the best to go for. Oh yes, thank you. We didn't talk about PrEP. PrEP is available. Again, there is the Israeli AIDS Task Force. They do have a webpage in English. If you'd like, feel free to message me afterwards, and I can put you in touch with a guy, basically the community coordinator there, and he can give you information about that. But yeah, PrEP is available. PEP is also available if you're concerned that you've been exposed. Then the advice is generally go to your nearest emergency department and tell them what's happened, and they will do what's necessary. So all of that stuff is available here as well. Yes, I believe that the Kupat Cholim do cover bottom surgery. But like I said, there are long wait lists. So I know that a number of people that have gone overseas to have that kind of work done. Okay. So it is possible, but it just takes a lot of time. Okay. That's the long waiting lists. All right. So let me know if you've got any other questions. We've gone a little bit over time. Basically, my goal for this session was to let you know that if you're thinking of making Aliyah, please do not have any qualms about talking to the Jewish Agency or Nefesh B'Nefesh. Again, depending upon your situation, if you don't want to come out and your marriage situation doesn't require you to come out, you are not obliged to, but doing so, they may be able to give you better advice. You will be treated the same way as any straight or cisgender person is. And to be honest, sometimes that's not wonderful. So, you know, you need to be persistent. They will push back and ask you for paperwork and then say, oh, we forgot to ask for this piece of paperwork, and they'll ask you for some more. It can be tedious, but, you know, if you ask them, are you sure that is everything that I will need? Then, you know, maybe that'll help them make sure that that they've given you the full list. All right. So we're not being discriminated against as part of the Aliyah process. So please get in touch. Again, you know, LGBT Olim is here. We are the community for LGBT people that have chosen to make Israel their home. There is I think, a wonderful community here. We have social events. It's a nice place to network, build a social network as well, and just to help you fit into Israel. So if you are planning on making Aliyah, please get in touch. We have Facebook groups you can join. We have an email list you can join. We have WhatsApp groups you can join. We have online events. Depending upon your time zone, they may or may not be convenient, but we do an online Shabbat dinner once or twice a month. We have an online coffee morning, and we have online movie nights, LGBT movie nights. They're weekly. Okay, so if you want to meet people, before you make Aliyah, that's a great way of doing so. And that is pretty much all I wanted to say in this session. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. It is lovely to see so many people. Like I said, I plan to upload this recording within the next couple of days, and I'll make that available on YouTube. And at some point, I'll link to it from our website as well. So thank you very, very much for joining us. And best of luck with your Aliyah. And I really hope to see you all here soon.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you
so
very
please
much.
stay safe. And
Thanks.
yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.